Hi, welcome to Popeye's House of Pain University. I'm Popeye, the Dean of Mean. Sit down, shut the fuck up, pay attention. Class is about to begin. Today, we're going to talk about the District of Columbia Act of 1871 and what that really means to all of us. What happened is the 41st Congress decided to create a municipal corporation. It's called the District of Columbia, and essentially it's a municipal corporation that's supposed to only have powers within the 10 square mile area known as the District of Columbia. And in doing so, it's supposed to be just this small municipality that's only supposed to have governing powers right in that area. Well, what most of us don't understand is that we're tricked into a implied contract, an implied contract that we actually agreed to several times, but we don't really know that we're doing so. How we're doing this is when we get our social security card, when we get our driver's license, when we get these other forms of government ID, and or any time we sign up for any government benefits, anything of that nature, there's always that little square box that says, are you a US citizen? Well, when we check that box, we just agreed to be not only a US citizen, but a resident of the area known as the District of Columbia. Well, this is part of a term and condition of a contract. And of course, if you're savvy of contracts at all, you know that all terms and conditions must be disclosed. If you're not savvy of contracts, there's at least four maxims that must be in order for a contract to be valid. The first would be that there is going to be mutual consideration, which means that both parties put in the same amount. Then there would be mutual benefit rather, which means that we obviously both get equal amounts out. Then there has to be, of course, full terms and conditions completely disclosed. And then lastly, there has to be two wedding signatures, yours and the other parties. Any other contracts really would not stand up in a court of law. Now, that being said, when we are looking at the District of Columbia and what it actually means, this is a corporation. It's nothing more than a piece of paper, an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with a bunch of ink and words basically all over it, and it's describing something. And outside of that, it really doesn't do anything else. It's nothing more than that. A corporation is not a building. It's not the people. Buildings come and go. Corporations can go from one place to another. So it's not the building. Corporations hire and fire all the time. So it's not the people either. A corporation is nothing more than a piece of paper. Now, when thinking about the government and that being a corporation, how exactly do they have authority over you? A piece of paper doesn't give somebody better DNA. A corporation, a piece of paper, can't give anything to anyone. It doesn't give me anything. It doesn't give you anything. So you have to think about these things in simple, basic terms. So if somebody else's DNA isn't any better because they have a piece of paper with ink in all over it, words, It doesn't make them their morals any better if they take your money, they put you in a cage. You can't just go and do this to anybody else, but yet they think if they call it government and taxes, that it's okay that they can steal your money. And of course, then if you don't like them stealing your money, they put you in a cage. We call it jail or prison. So, that being said, when we are talking about a corporation, of course, if when we're talking about a corporation, and if a corporation happens to go, oh, let's say, bankrupt, such as the United States has been now for 4 times. The Articles of Confederation was one. The Declaration or the Constitution was another, and it was almost an overlap of the Articles of Confederation because there wasn't enough things in the Articles of Confederation to cover all of what was necessary. So they had to do the Constitution. And if you don't think that I'm right about this, go back and read them. You will see that it states that the United States is assuming the debt of the colonies. So, that being said, when a company goes bankrupt, it's the bank that owns the company at that point. They own title. They're the ones that are essentially supporting the situation. Same as if you bought a car or bought a house on time, the bank owns said property. Now, when we're talking about the bank that owns the United States, we're talking about the World Bank via the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, which no longer really exists because it's actually the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund, which happens to be the World Bank, which happens to be owned by the Crown Corporation, the Queen of England. Now, let's be really straight. This is one huge corporation. And when we speak of the World Bank, we are talking about a bank that owns banks, which means that they own then the government in every country but 3: Cuba, North Korea, and Iran. Well, one of the things that we have to realize here is a couple of different things. Since we're talking about one huge, large corporation, when you see the president or you see your congressman, these are middle managers. These are middlemen that they have no decision making whatsoever in any company, every company. The decisions always come from the top. Now, that being said, if we were to compare some of what's going on in this world when the United States goes off and invades some country in the Middle East, whether it's Syria or Iran or Iraq or whoever, and we think that we're being virtuous because they're doing good and so on. Well, you remove Iran from that equation. You got Iraq, Syria, Turkey, some of these other countries. The World Bank owns these countries as well. They have a central bank. They own the central bank in those countries. Well, what it means to be a central bank is you are the funding for that government, which means that you own that government. Well, let's put this into a little bit more perspective. Despite all the political and religious things that they try to make you believe, which is not even close to true, so we can touch on that at another time. Let's look at this like a company that we know very well here in the United States, Sears and Roebuck. Now, anybody that's been paying attention knows that Sears is going out of business. They also happen to own Orchard Supply Hardware, and they also happen to own Ace Hardware. Now, this is what is happening around the world. Sears and Roebuck tells Ace Hardware, go attack Orchard Supply and kill all those employees. And we need you to do this because we need to generate some income. And the best way to do that is for you guys to start a war with them. What? We would never, ever, ever consider right here in America having one company go and attack another company and kill all those employees to help support the main mother company, the main corporation. We would tell them to go fuck themselves. We wouldn't deal with that. But yet, we think that there's some kind of virtue if we call it government and we're faked into believing that there's some threat by a guy that's living in a cave on the other side of the world. We've got a couple of big ass oceans between us and him. We have 300 million people here. 100 million of them have guns, of which they have on average about 3 guns per, which means that we pretty much have a gun per person. So if you don't have one, your neighbor probably does. So if we did get invaded, if somebody was actually able to get a couple of guys with towels on their heads from across this ocean with what they would need to attack us seriously, come on. Let's be serious about this. And if you don't think that some of this is true as far as them faking whether or not these are even threats, whether some guy in Syria is a threat, some organization called ISIS is a threat, it's faked. This stuff is faked. It's called false flags. If you don't believe me, look up, Google, just type it in, Operation Northwoods, PDF. Operation Mongoose, PDF. You're going to see in Operation Northwoods where this is about the Cuban crisis, the Cuban issue. And in 1962, this memo was issued and it was signed by the chief of staff of the military. It talks about faking rumors, talks about faking attacks, talks about sinking our own ship and then having funerals for the mock victims. Go read it. If you don't think that this government is faking this stuff to make you believe that you need them and you need their protection, go look at it. Go look at Operation Northwoods. Type it in. Operation Northwoods PDF. Then let's get back to the fact that we're talking about a corporation. And of course, a corporation that we're talking about middle managers here. And even your president. I don't give a fuck who he's called. It could be Obama. It could be Clinton, Bush. I really don't care. You put George Washington in right now, it wouldn't fucking matter. He doesn't call the shots. He's middle management. Look at how all companies are structured. It's always the people at the top that makes the decisions. The guy that you see is always just some spokesperson. Yes, he might be middle management, but he's only doing what he's told to do. When we vote for these people you're not voting for somebody that's outside the company. You're voting for somebody that's already part of the company. You're voting for somebody that is essentially trying to increase the profits for the company. And by you voting, you get to decide who gets that next position. And, well, you got to believe that when you think in your own mind, yeah, I know these guys are corrupt, but I'm choosing the lesser of the two evils. You're still choosing evil. Think about it. You're still choosing evil. When you start to realize, too, that when you are dealing with a for-profit corporation, that the managers, the middle managers, their primary intention, just like any good manager for any company, is to increase profits for the company. That's how they move up in the company. Wow. So how do they increase profits for the company? They have to create legislation that essentially becomes laws that when you do something wrong, they get to fine you and take more money from you. Or they get to do something that creates a law that they get to tax you. And even if they call it a fee, it's still a tax. The name doesn't matter. If they're taking your money, it's still a tax. And it is robbery. It is plain out robbery. Again, let's go right back to, does somebody with a piece of paper called a corporation make their DNA any better than yours? Of course not. You bleed just the same as they do. Does it mean that they have higher morals or more virtuous? Not when they stick a gun in your head to take your money. We can call things a lot of different words. Wording is how they trap you. Wording is how they enslave you. They call things differently than what you think they actually are, so that you think that it's something different than what it actually is. You have to realize, when we're dealing with a situation like the District of Columbia, the Act of 1871, we're dealing with a corporation that has one goal in mind. It's flat broke, has been for a long time. It needs lots and lots and lots and lots of money because it is needing to pay a debt, needing to pay a big debt. And of course, some of this goes even further back in history than 1871. And in fact, if you really were to know your history and you looked at the Treaty of Peace from Versailles, 1782, and then it's out there, you can find it. And I'll put the link down below. I'll put the link down below for the District of Columbia Act as well, so you can see the three sections that mean the most to you. We never won the Revolutionary War. Most people would say, oh, come on, that's crazy. Read this Treaty of Peace from Versailles, 1782. I can assure you that it says that the King of England financed both sides of the war. Well, most people, when I say something like that to them, they say, well, what does that mean, Popeye? And I said, well, think about this. If we have this little plot of land out in the middle of wherever, nobody owns it. And two guys fight over this little plot of land. One guy wins, kicks the ass of the other guy, throws this other guy off the land. Why would the guy that won pay even a penny to the guy that lost? Think about this for a minute. The guy that wins pays anything to the guy that lost? Why? There's no reason for this. There's no reason that anybody would ever do this. If I fought somebody over $100 sitting in the middle of the street, I certainly wouldn't turn around and hand it back to the guy if it was just floating down the street and didn't belong to either one of us. Obviously, it belongs to somebody else, and that guy lost out. Hell yeah. And, well, if he ever showed up, he deserves that money. But if it's just some other schmo on the other side of the street, I fucking collect that money. It's my money. Like it's my land. There's no reason I'm going to give anything to anybody else. So you have to think about this with just some pure common logic. Something that isn't too common anymore. Basic common sense. So start thinking about it, folks. Start thinking about the fact that you're dealing with a corporation and not a government. This is part of why when you vote, your vote doesn't mean much to them because they have no obligation to do anything for you. It's not the government that you think that it is. And in fact, in the case Downs v. Bidwell, Chief Justice Marshall Harlan stated that we have two national governments, one operating under the Constitution with all of its restrictions in place, and the other one maintained by the Congress, and it's operating independently and outside of that instrument. What he was talking about was the District of Columbia. So when you start thinking about whether or not your constitutional rights are being violated or not, well, maybe they are and maybe they're not. Which Constitution? When they did the District of Columbia Act of 1871, they created a second constitution. It's called a ratification. Of course, if you were to look at what ratification means, it means it's a voidable act. And why? Because it's done by an unauthorized agent. This is exactly what ratification is. So not only did the Declaration of Independence tell us that we have, as the people, have the right to remove a government and replace it with whatever we want if said government, the existing government, gets out of control and is doing things against the will of the people, which ours is now. We're there. We're right there. And so think about it, folks. Think about who it is that you're doing business with and why it is you're doing business with them. If it's not the government that you think it is, then what is it?